American crayfish was introduced in the 20s. The next 50 years, they consumed all the local crayfish. And then they started eating each other.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today we're going to be talking about the Hickory Crawdads, who play in Hickory, North Carolina. They are the single-A affiliate of the Texas Rangers. Later on in this episode, I'll be speaking with designer Dan Simon, who you know well if you're a listener to this podcast. He created the current version of the Crawdads logo. I'll be speaking with Ranger Amy Burnett, Baseball by Design's very own wildlife correspondent. And then Dan Simon will be back once again with one of his Studio Simon Stumpers. Right now, I am so pleased to welcome to Baseball by Design Douglas Locascio, who is the general manager of the Hickory Crawdads in Hickory, North Carolina. Douglas, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great this morning. How are you?
I am doing very, very well. So happy to be talking about this awesome, fun brand that has been around since 1993, more than 30 years. It's incredible to first of all realize that 1993 is more than 30 years ago. But it's, a long-standing brand. It's been through a couple different iterations. But as always, I like to start with a really basic question, which is just why is it that a team in Hickory, North Carolina is called the Crawdads?
So yeah, when the team was created back in 92, I guess you'd say. So the team came over, the local ownership group purchased the Gastonia Rangers and moved them here to Hickory, North Carolina. So I guess all that probably started in like 91 timeframe. And they launched the local ownership group, Beaver Sports at the time. They launched a name the team contest. Back in the 90s, it was pretty common that you just basically went with your affiliate. So at that time, we were the White Sox, or we're going to be the White Sox. So it was pretty common you would have just been the Hickory White Sox or the Hickory Sox. But our ownership group, they wanted to do something different. And I've actually, one of our original minority owners, Charles Young, had numerous conversations with him and just said, hey, what all went into it and stuff like that. And he said, dumb luck, honestly, but they wanted something that was going to stand out. So they launched a name the team contest. And from that, the finalists were the Woodchucks, the River Rats, the Valley Cats, the Hound Dogs, or the Crawdads. And ultimately they landed on the Crawdads. And the reasoning is kind of because of the strength and presence of water. And right out behind our outfield is Lake Hickory, and so it has a basin right there. You can't necessarily see it from the stadium, but it is back there. The land here before the ballpark was here was just marsh and things of that nature. So they just found it really symbolic of this area and really wanted to do it. So they were probably one of the first teams, them and the Mudcats, I would say, who really went out on that ledge and they're like, all right, we're going to do something different. And so the H with the Crawdad poking through was formed. And honestly, that has been our mark for 33 years. So obviously we've kind of, as you mentioned, done a little reiteration. To this day, they say that was probably one of the best decisions they ever said. They were like, why would we be the Crawdads? But let's go with it. And here it is 33 years later.
Okay. First of all, Douglas, are you originally from the North Carolina area?
I'm not. I'm from Florida originally. So I'm from the west coast of Florida, in St. Pete, Clearwater area, in the town of Largo. So I'm from Largo, Florida.
Okay. If you're from the Philly area like I am, you'd call it Clearwater. So that's I asked this question because one of the things I did before this interview is I was looking at like these language maps of the country where people use different terms. And according to the research that I'm seeing, they're accurate for where I grew up. I called this animal a crayfish. And I know that there are parts of the country that call this animal a crawdad, but according to the map that I'm looking at in North Carolina, you should be calling it a crawfish, not a crawdad.
Correct. Yeah, it should be a crawfish. And honestly, I do not know where the dad portion came up with, but it's definitely stuck. We've had some fun with it in recent years. We came up with an alternate identity and did a spoof, and we did a whole press release, media and things, and we changed and we blasted and said we were changing our names to the Craw Moms. The dads were out and the moms were in. And we did it as a spinoff, but people were irate.
Yes.
They were calling the mayor, they were calling the city council. They're saying we cannot be anything but the Crawdad. So we quickly learned our lesson. Like, if we were ever going to change, not to mess with the name.
You did that at a time. It was for Mother's Day, and I remember that you announced it like it was a permanent change, not just that it was a one-off, as you see so often. What made you decide to try to pull that one on the fans to make them think it was permanent?
It was honestly just a marketing collaboration. Yeah. You just kind of threw things out there. If you go back and read the original press release, like, it had the names of like Marge Simpson was in it, Peter Griffith's wife, but like her name was in the release. So if you actually read the release, you were like, okay, this is completely fake. Like, this isn't really happening. But and we did it. Originally, we were just going to do it. We did it just for Mother's Day weekend. But when we announced it, we kind of put it out there like it was a permanent change. And it definitely set the media abuzz.
That is fun. I think people will react negatively. I'm sure people reacted negatively when the team brought on Crawdads back in 1993. You mentioned, I think before we started officially recording, that you've been with the team since 2010. So by the time you got there, this brand was firmly entrenched in the community. What do you think is behind the community's embrace of the Crawdads nickname and brand?
I think it just represents the community. When people think Hickory, North Carolina, they think the Hickory Crawdads. They take great pride, and we do as well. It's a huge challenge for our staff to get out and be a part of the community, because that's what minor league baseball is. When the players come, we encourage them to go out and do a community appearances or just get to know, because this community's embraced us, so we just want to give back to the community any way possible. But when people say Crawdads, people just get excited. And what's not to get excited about with baseball anyways, but people just hear Crawdads. It's a symbol of Hickory. It's something that people take great pride in. People love saying that, hey, we are an affiliate of the Texas Rangers now. And so it's created people to be Texas Ranger fans, but just baseball fans. And it's just a symbol of Hickory. It's a way to bridge future sports tourism. But we've been here for 33 years, so we're very well established. It's kind of like the Speedway here. Hickory Motor Speedway was known as the birthplace of NASCAR stars. And so when people think Hickory, North Carolina, they think racing, baseball, and textile, and that's ever changing now, but racing and baseball are two key parts that are never going away. And they just take great pride in it.
We've mentioned North Carolina a couple of times. We've mentioned that this brand has largely been around with various iterations over the course of 30 years. This is a general manager question for you here, right? Like, how do you maintain a consistent brand and keep that brand equity and keep this, really well-established, well-liked brand alive, but also stand out in a very crowded minor league baseball market in North Carolina with constant change and constant new teams and rebrands and all that sort of thing?
I think it's just being creative. It's using resources. It's doing research. I tell you, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, minor league has changed so much with these kind of what if nights, the spinoffs and things of that nature. So you're able to be creative. Not saying we're not creative with our Crawdad brand, but you hold true to history. You keep what's historical about it. You talked about the different iterations, and really the H, our primary home hat logo, has been that H with the Crawdad poking out for 33 years. Yeah. The crawdad might have changed here or there a little bit. The H might have changed just slightly, but our colors have been the same. So really, it was when we launched the project with Studio Simon, and honestly, we kind of handcuffed him. But we were so before Studio Simon got involved, we only had one logo, so it was just the H logo. That was our home hat, road hat, alternate. That was the only logo, and
Yeah.
then we had a word mark,
Yeah.
and so we kind of did things half backwards, like the city just invested a lot of money in the ballpark. They had just done all this brand new signage, so the logo's everywhere. And so our first meeting with Dan, we're like, hey, like, we want this change, we need the name to stay. Oh, by the way, the H logo is plastered everywhere in the stadium, so we need to keep that, and that needs to be. And he's like, well, so how that evolved, we kind of talked change, but then we landed on just adding, and I think it goes to your original question, it's having the tools in your toolbox. So
Yeah.
what we did is we were able to create an arsenal of logos. So we revitalized and actually had a primary logo. We've never had a primary logo. It was just always the home cap logo. So then you took that and then created things around it. We were probably one of the first teams to really embark our state logo, we call it, with the claw holding a star where Hickory is in the state of North Carolina. We were probably on the leading edge of teams that come out with that. And now you see everyone that has a state logo. And so it was just kind of just being on the forefront, but just consistently using your colors the right way, making sure that the right marks are used, just policing it better and knowing if the correct logo is being used in the correct way. And honestly, I have a phenomenal staff, headed up by our AGM of marketing, Ashley Salinas. She actually oversees our merchandise team store now. And so instead of having like 4 or 5 people, because their view of it they're like, oh, I'm going to use this logo because it looks better. Having one person that centrally allocates all the marketing and messaging helps as well, because then it's clear, it's concise, and it's consistent.
That North Carolina state logo that you're talking about, you do see a lot of teams embracing the state outline and putting something where the team is in that state. There are two alternate brands that I want to ask you about very quickly here before I let you go. The first one that I just absolutely love, but I'd love to know the story behind where it came from, the Llamas or Llamas de Hickory for the Copa de la Diversión program. How come you guys went with Llamas for your Copa program?
So when Copa came out, I guess probably in 2017, 2018, they kind of did that trial and stuff of that nature. And then we jumped on board in 2019. And so from that, it was just, we looked at something that was unique to the culture, but also something unique that could stand out. So we kind of just did a staff poll, and llamas, pinatas, salsa. There was a few out there. Ultimately just decided on the llamas. Again, right place at the right time. We come up with the llamas. Llamas became hugely, not that they weren't before, but just blew up with Fortnite, and there was just different things that really took the llamas to another level. And it's just fun. It can go with all of it. But just the features of the logo itself are pretty cool. Just in the llama's mouth is actually a furniture leg, and that pays for Hickory being known as the furniture producing industry. So it's in its mouth. The vibrancy is just lots of bright colors. So I think that was our biggest initiative when we started. We wanted something more than our traditional red and black. And so when you think Latin culture, you think bright colors and vibrancy. And so it was kind of all those pieces going together. And then honestly, it's been a home run for us. And the llamas has far exceeded our expectations.
That's great. That's great. The other one, it made a splash when it was announced, playing, off the nursery rhymes and Hickory. You unveiled an identity, the Hickory Dickory Docks, with a mouse running up a clock.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I need to ask this question, but where does that come from? How come, how come you guys went with that?
I've had that idea since I started. You always know the nursery rhyme, hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock struck 12, the mouse,
Yep.
and that's always in your head. So when I heard Hickory and I moved here to Hickory in 2010, I was like, oh man, like the mouse has to be a part of it somewhere. It never was until, like I said, we started rolling out these alternate identities. The one before that was another good one, and we were the hickory couch potatoes.
Oh yeah.
And so that was another nod to the furniture industry being the couch, but then just doing research and knowing your market and things like that. North Carolina is actually one of the nation's leader in manufacturing of sweet potatoes. And so when we created the couch potatoes, that's where the colors came from. It's having a story. It's not just coming up with a logo, just come up with a logo. So the Hickory Dickory Dock one is that prime example. You have the nursery rhyme, and again, it has those fun tunes that are kind of tied into it. If you actually look at the clock, on the clock, it is positioned at 8:28, and that's a nod to our area code because Hickory is 828, and so it's positioned there accordingly. It's just having fun. I think it's just, yes, it's a way to sell additional merchandise, but the players enjoy it because they feel like they get to know the area more, and also it's just something different. They're not wearing their traditional red, black, or blue jersey, so it gives them something fun to wear. It's a running joke sometimes. They're like, oh, if we keep winning in these jerseys, we're gonna wear them more than just the promotion. And so it's fun to see. It does create a little confusion, to be perfectly honest, because if you do come into the store, you see a Doc's jersey, you see a Llama's jersey, you see the Crawdads, and people are like, wait, I thought you were the Crawdad. So like, if people don't know the backstory, and so it's a challenge to our marketing department. And so, but it's a way just to make each minor league baseball is 66 nights of fun. How do you make each game the most unique game possible and give that person the lasting impression? And so that's our challenge. We have that challenge every offseason. And we've always said we're going to take chances. Some of these are going to fail and we're going to fall flat on our face, but we're going to learn from it and we're going to get better from it. So we're just going to continue to take chances. And the Docs is just a prime example of that. We were actually featured on in Sports Center. We were one of the featured logos of their minor league showcase for the weekend that we wore the Docs. And it's just fun when you get to see it on a national scape. But just the response, it's a way to be unique. It's a way to step out of your comfort zone, but also tell the backstory and your creative juices, let them flow.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is to walk into a team store at a new ballpark that I haven't been to before and just see all of the brands that are out there. And I think the balance between sort of the brand equity of your primary brand and then the fun that you can have, the stories you can tell with alternate brands. I think minor league baseball is doing a great job of walking that line. And I think it works better at minor league baseball at that level than it does at the majors, right? Like when I see like Major League Baseball doing the City Connect jerseys, that to me, that's brand confusion, right? Like I see, when I see the Red Sox wearing yellow, I'm thinking that's, what's happening, right? Like, or even my Phillies with their blue and the Liberty Bell cap. And it's like, it's cool cap. I don't like the uniform as much, but the cap I like a lot. But it's just like, it's sort of confusing. At the minor league level, it's more about like, it's the stories that you're telling. So one of the other things I like to do when I go to a new minor league ballpark is check out the concessions. Do you sell any concessions that involve, I wanted to say crayfish, crawdads?
No, we don't. We've talked of doing, obviously, down in Louisiana, it's huge. You do the crawfish boils and stuff like that. We have never pulled one off. My former boss, he actually had a huge seafood allergy, and just the smell or the steam, he would break out in hives and stuff like that. Previously, when he was here, we never did. But we've dabbled with, we used to have a we would do a food kind of challenge, but it wasn't like seafood related. It was
Yeah.
basically, who could eat like this ginormous amount of food. It was like 2 foot long hot dogs,
Oh
French
no.
fries, corn dog. Like it had all of this stuff, and it was called the Claw Lossel Challenge. So
Nice.
like that was the spin off of it, but we've never really had seafood. So
All right.
that might you might be onto something
There you
there.
go. I'm available for consultation here at any time, but feel free to give me a call anytime. Douglas, this is so much fun. I kept you longer than I meant to, but there's so much to talk about here, and it's such a fun brand. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing these stories. Where can people find the team? Where can people find you on social media and online?
Absolutely. So the team's on all, we're on X, Instagram, Facebook. Our website's the easiest, hickorycrawdads.com. Honestly, we're running a huge end of the year clearance sale right now. So if you go check that out, you might get some great deals on shirts or hats and stuff of that nature. Me personally, I'm on Facebook, and Instagram and Twitter as well. Not that familiar with a lot of it, but enough, as my kids say, enough to make me dangerous.
That sounds good. Douglas, thank you so much, and best of luck in the off season, and maybe we'll see you next season at the ballpark.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am so pleased to welcome back to Baseball by Design once again my good friend Dan Simon, who is the creator of the current iteration of this Hickory Crawdads logo. Dan, good morning. How are you?
Good morning to you, Paul. I am fantastic. Looking forward to being here in the guest seat as your design interview. Let's do it and let's have some fun.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of fun, this is a fun logo. You have what I imagine is a pretty interesting challenge as a designer, which was to take an existing brand to update one component of it, the primary logo, or I guess it's kind of the cap logo, but it was really their one existing logo that they had was a version of a cap logo. You updated that and then you built a brand around it. So that seems like a unique challenge in the world of logo design. How did you approach that?
I do want to say to start off that I don't know that I would say it's a unique challenge because I have done this before, and I'm sure other sports branding professionals have done it. Certainly, it's not done frequently. Most brand identity developments are new brands or rebrands, or if it's a brand update, it's sort of a start over from scratch brand update, which I think kind of makes it a rebrand, even if you don't change the name. In this case, what you said was indeed the case. They had this cap logo that, frankly, in minor league baseball and on the minor league baseball branding landscape is kind of iconic. It was one of the first of the fun minor league baseball brand identity logos. And like was the case when I did the Toledo Mud Hens brand update, similar situation where they had a logo that was a cap logo specifically that was designed back when sports branding was not an industry yet. And the artwork in both cases had what we sometimes refer to as visual naivete, meaning it really wasn't crafted that well.
Mhm.
But they didn't want to remove those from the system. Now, in the case of Toledo, we did not even update that artwork. That cap logo stayed in the brand identity system unchanged. With Hickory, the decision was made to keep that cap logo, but recraft it, make it look better without really changing it. I think I can safely say that somebody who saw the new logo without the old logo next to it might not have even known it was changed, and that was the intent. But again, since that brand identity the original brand identity was created before sports branding was the industry that it has become. The brand identity system was bereft of other enough other visual assets that the team can use for merchandise, marketing, and just building out that brand. And it was our charge to create those additional visual assets built around that original cap logo.
The original cap logo, the original brand was unveiled in 1993. That is just a couple of years after the Carolina Mudcats. And you and I often point to the Carolina Mudcats as sort of a turning point in minor league baseball branding, this sort of unique community-based name where it doesn't matter who the parent club is, it just is a fun nickname that is relevant to the local community. This Crawdads brand, first of all, is Crawdads your preferred nomenclature there? Is Crawdads what you called them growing up? I called them crayfish.
Yes, you and I are from a similar part of the country. You specifically in Pennsylvania, and I was from Wayne, New Jersey. And yeah, they were called, I don't know that we had crayfish in New Jersey. I know we had a creek running right through my neighborhood, and we played in that creek regularly. And I can tell you, I saw pollywogs, tadpoles in there.
Pollywogs.
And frogs,
Yeah.
but I can tell you there were no crayfish. So, but I was aware of them, and they were crayfish. So you also have crayfish, crawdads, and crawfish.
Right.
So
all the same thing. We'll check in with
Right.
Ranger Amy about this. I'm pretty sure that there were crayfish in that creek of yours there. My brother and I used to catch crayfish. We'd catch them and put them in a bucket and watch them run around, and then we'd release them.
Well, let me get back to your question about that, though. Even though we called them crayfish where I grew up, I think the name crawdads of the three options is the best. And I'm not just saying that because I did this identity, because I didn't choose the name, but it's more of a, well, like, why are they called dads? Like, I get crayfish.
I'm going to get back to the question that I was about to ask, which is, you have this cap logo from 1993. It's from an era of, I like your term, visual naivete. You then take it, you update it. Like you say, if you put them side by side, you can see specific differences. Thicker lines. I want to say a brighter red. Did you change the red? Do you remember?
I do not remember. This is, looking, I've got the style guide open in front of me now as some visual reference for this discussion. And I see that it's Pantone 185 there are two reds, because I used a darker red for some shadows in the primary logo and some of the other logos. And 185 is not an uncommon Pantone red for sports brand identities. Matter of fact, I can't say for sure. It might even be the Cincinnati Reds red. So when I get to choose reds, I always go with 485, because that is the brightest, reddest, truest red in my eyes. And since it's not Pantone 485 in this brand identity, I would say we kept their existing red.
Well, first of all, I think it's safe to say that most Baseball by Design listeners listen to this podcast with their Pantone swatch book handy. So I know everyone was following along there. It does look brighter, and that could just be because of the thicker lines, but also there's some other sort of points of contrast sort of throughout. One of the things you did, though, speaking of color, you added sort of a watery blue, because that's where crawdads live. And that blue can be found in the primary logo with some rippling water. It can be found in one of the alternates that has the state outline of North Carolina. There's another alternate where you've got this crawdad character, this completely new version of the crawdad character with a couple of bats over his shoulders, sort of looking menacingly at the viewer. There's another one where the eyes of the crawdad are just sort of coming up out of some rippling water there. And that water, of course, is in that light blue. And then there's another one where you have a claw. This is a version. This is a very updated version. There was a a really strange claw logo that they had from 93 to 2015, which you updated to look much more contemporary, a claw holding a baseball. And there's just a tiny bit of that blue sort of creating a shadow effect on that baseball. So all of that is to say you added a blue to an iconic brand as part of this brand update. Is that a challenge?
Is that a challenge? No, it wasn't a challenge. It was an intentional decision. The blue was added mainly because I was bringing water into the identity, and that we needed, frankly, a blue for that.
Yeah.
And then also it benefited the brand identity system from a couple of standpoints. One is, as nice as black, red, and white are as a color palette, an additional splash of color only makes it that much better. So from a brand identity color palette standpoint, the addition of the blue was beneficial, but also what has become popular in minor league baseball sartorial choices are the light blue. Minor league baseball teams at some point started to bring back the light blue jerseys from the 70s, and I guess it got into the 80s, worn by the Kansas City Royals, the St. Louis Cardinals, your Philadelphia Phillies, etc. When I say etc., were there others?
There were a lot, right? Like the Expos and the Brewers and the Rangers, and I think,
Yep.
yeah,
Okay,
there were.
yep.
I think there were a bunch.
Yes. So, right. I say, of course, to that off the top of my head, it wasn't coming to me, but as soon as you said that, it's like, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
So, and now that was something that was from the 70s and 80s. And then right around this time, so this would have been, what did we say it was? It took the field first in 2016. The
Yep.
work was done in 2015. So we're talking about a decade ago. I can't say this was the first one to do that. Might have been, but I'm not making that claim. But then other teams did it as well. And to this day, it's being done. I'm doing one currently where there's a light blue jersey. Did it for the Memphis Redbirds when we did that. And it's the fans love it, and for good reason.
Well, it is as you say, it's a great baseball color. The last thing, Dan, I wanted to ask you about with this logo is the character. And again, you did not create the original logo from 1993. So I imagine, when you see characters, when you see anthropomorphic animals, especially when they're holding a baseball, right? There's usually some sort of either baseball pose or, just like a menacing pose, or, like a full just sort of body character. This, I have to say, when I look at the original version of this logo and then the one that you updated, all I can think is paint me like one of your French crawdads. It's sort of on his side, propped up on one arm, but it's not a typical sort of baseball pose, or it's not even really a typical pose that you might see a character in. Was that pose difficult to work with when you were handed that and told, make sure you don't change this?
Well, it sounds to me like what you're describing, or reading between the lines of what you're saying, is not that this is not a good pose, but it certainly is an unexpected pose. And
Yes.
frankly, that goes back to the whole visual naivete thing, where back then they weren't thinking, well, let's make this a tough baseball player. Whoever the artist was who did this just decided this is how I'm going to do the pose. And frankly, even though when we use a phrase like visual naivete, which has the word naive in it, that suggests that it's not that good, but sometimes there's something pretty wonderful that comes out of that visual naivete. So would I have had this character in this pose? Probably not, but there's just something kind of delightful about it. So it was, I kind of agreed with, not kind of, I fully agreed with the team. Hey, let's not throw this what is it? Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's keep
Sure.
the baby because it's a cute baby.
I do have to point out too that the phrase, it's actually draw me, not paint me, draw me like one of your French girls, is from the 1997 movie Titanic. And the Hickory Crawdads logo was from 1993. So I think Titanic was ripping off the Hickory Crawdads rather than the other way around. So
I'm certain. I'm certain of it.
Leonardo DiCaprio is always mining minor league baseball for inspiration. Dan, we're going to go talk to Ranger Amy for a little bit, and then we're going to come back to you for one of our Studio Simon Stumpers. But as always, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom and your perspective and dredging the memory banks from almost a decade ago to talk about this work that you do. Certainly a classic logo and a classic brand, and I'd like to get to a game there someday. So, and this logo is part of that because as you know, I like to base where I go to baseball games on do I like the logo. So, thanks as always. Dan is on Instagram at @studio_Simon. Dan, thank you. We'll see you in a few minutes.
I'm looking forward to that. See you soon.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am very pleased, as always, to welcome back to the podcast our very own Baseball by Design wildlife correspondent, Ranger Amy Burnett. Ranger Amy, hello.
Hello.
First order of business. Crayfish, crawfish, crawdads.
Is there even any question? Of course it's crayfish.
Crayfish. That seems to be a northeastern thing.
Yeah, I looked it up. There's actually a cool map. Like if you are in the Northeast, you say crayfish. In the Southeast, you say crawfish. Notice how I get my little accent going.
Oh boy.
And then in the other parts of the country, kind of in like the middle, crawdad.
For the listener at home, Ranger Amy is gesturing like this.
And then crawdads in California and
Yeah.
up the coast of the western part of the country.
Yeah.
It's crayfish to me, but
Those
I'm a little biased.
those language maps that outline our weird regionalisms are kind of fun.
I think they're fun. I was like, oh, someone made a map of this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
those maps are
someone
cool.
had way too much time. on
You know
their
who
hands.
talks about those maps a lot is my close personal friend, Grammar Girl, Mignon Fogarty, who's been on this podcast. Let's talk about the Hickory Crawdads.
Yeah.
They have a crayfish-based logo.
Mhm.
What makes the crayfish cool? What's cool about a crawdad?
You know, if you think about it, it's how everyone loves the bald eagle because it's the symbol of our country, and then
Mm.
people find out that they're scavengers, and
Go
it's like,
birds.
and it's just go birds, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And then you find out they're scavengers, and people are like, oh, crayfish are sort of the same thing.
Mm.
But they are really what's cool about that is they actually are responsible for cleaning up a lot of the streams and rivers in the southeast, especially. They're valued for that, and there's a fish at the bottom, a dead fish at the bottom of the creek. You can bet that there will be some crawdads chowing down on it, and until it's gone, and even eat the bones.
So in a baseball context, they would be like the grounds crew.
Hey, where would we be without the grounds crew, right?
It's true. We'd all be pulling our own tarps.
Oh, that would be horrible. In the rain and everything. I'm
Right.
such a wimp. I have to get under.
Well, if you do it right, you get it out before the rain gets there. You know who really likes cold and wet?
Who?
Crayfish.
You're trying to get me back on
I'm
top.
trying
was
to
pretty
this
good. Keep
this
me back
yeah,
on
we're pretty
topic
much
here.
off the rails already.
We totally are. Okay, so cool things about crayfish. They have compound eyes. Do you wish that you had compound eyes?
I don't know. Tell me about
Well,
compound
you
eyes.
might if you were a baseball player, because compound eyes means you have more than one eye, so they can do different. They can act sort of independently. Their peripheral vision is amazing. They catch movement. So if a pitcher had a compound eye or compound eyes, he would catch the batters that were trying to steal all the time because he could just see because they're really good for seeing movement. And so that's so crayfish need to see things that are moving so they can catch them up with those big claws and eat them.
So what else? They've got exoskeletons.
They have exoskeletons, so
Yeah.
that would be really great. Like yesterday we saw someone crash into another guy, and he got the wind knocked out of him.
Yeah.
If you had an exoskeleton, you probably wouldn't get the wind knocked out of you quite so easily. If a fish tries to eat you, it's kind of hard for that to happen unless they can swallow you whole.
Okay.
So if a big fish like a bass could eat a crayfish really easily, but something smaller couldn't really get at that exoskeleton. So it's good protection.
So like a catcher or an umpire.
A catcher wouldn't need all that armor, or
Yeah.
maybe they are like crayfish.
It's their own armor.
Yeah,
And
I
it would
like
be very hard for a fish to eat JT Realmuto.
What?
If the crayfish are like catchers with their equipment.
Yes, yes.
JT Realmuto basically has an exoskeleton.
He does. So the thing about crayfish is that I think a lot of us grew up like catching crayfish.
Oh yeah.
Did you?
Oh, we've already
Anyone?
talked about that on this episode. Yeah,
Oh.
that's a thing.
I think it's something nostalgic that people would people love and can identify with. Because I was wondering, why did they pick why did they call themselves the crawdads? Like why? It's not something like the sharks or the bulls or a really tough guy, but crayfish are tough in their own way. But what I think people really like about crayfish is they remember turning over rocks when they were little and catching them and putting them in a bucket and just watching them. And for some people, a lot of people, I think that the crayfish or the crawdad symbolizes sort of just getting out there in nature and just being in wonderment of something that's in your local stream. And if you have a crayfish in your stream, it means that you have good water quality.
Okay. So at the very beginning of this episode,
Mhm.
I used a quote from a movie, and the quote was about how the American crayfish basically like came in and took over all the ponds and destroyed all the other crayfish. Is that a thing?
It's a thing.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, in Arizona, so, I worked for Game and Fish when I worked in Arizona.
Yeah.
And the rusty crayfish has taken over lakes and streams in Arizona to the point where it has actually endangered a type of snake, because the crayfish in the lakes and streams where mostly streams where this endangered garter snake lives, the narrow-headed garter snake, the crayfish will go and just snip off the heads of the little baby snakes. And so they don't even have a chance to grow up and turn into big garter snakes. So that crayfish is actually the one that's invasive in Arizona, is native to this part, to the southeastern part of the country that you're talking about and where the baseball team is. But in Arizona, you can't even transport them in a bucket. You can get a ticket if you want to transport them because you want to eat them because
Yeah.
they're tasty. You have to put them on ice.
Oh.
And you pretty much have to have to kill them first. If you transport them live, even in a cooler, you can get in trouble, big trouble.
This is like my friend Ted, who got a $500 fine for trying to bring an apple into New Zealand.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But
I told him you should have killed the apple first.
but there's really good reason.
Yeah.
I guess if you are a baseball player, it's a pretty, basically they dominate, right? So
Yeah.
the crayfish dominate.
Getting back to the task at hand here,
Yeah.
I think we've determined a crayfish, crawdad, is probably going to be the catcher on a baseball team, but is also going to be pretty good serving on the grounds crew.
Yeah. And pitcher, catching those guys stealing.
Oh, right, with his visual
Because
acuity.
those compound eyes.
Okay.
They also are amazingly fast, but
Really?
only when they go backwards. So they crawl forward and sideways, but they swim backwards.
So he'd be really good in like a pickle.
Yeah, really.
If
That's my favorite part of a baseball game. Every time there's a pickle, I just start giggling.
every time a crawdad gets caught in a rundown, they're like, "Whoa, look how fast he's going
It
backwards."
just goes choom, choom, choom,
Oh,
with
see?
his tail.
I'll never forget that about crawdads. No.
Yeah.
Ranger Amy, thank you very much. Go find Ranger Amy on the socials, the real Ranger Amy on Instagram, Ranger Amy on Twitter. Hey, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, everyone, welcome back once again for the second time on this episode. My good friend Dan Simon of Studio Simon is here with his weekly trivia question, which we call Studio Simon Stumpers. Dan, how have you been?
Since the last time we talked, the same. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, good. Maintaining the status quo. It's sometimes that's all you can ask for.
Okay, so let's do our stumper here.
Let's do a stumper.
In talking with me, you had mentioned that the Hickory Crawdads set up shop in 1993. You might have also mentioned that when you talked with Douglas. But before that, Hickory had minor league baseball off and on from 1939 through 1960. And these teams all went by the same name, but it was a name that would not be deemed acceptable today for a professional team or a collegiate sports program for that matter. So
Before you get into this question, are you telling me that you have invented at least 2 names that would not be acceptable in today's minor league baseball landscape, and that's going to be part of this question?
well, I will say I did not invent them because they're names that
Oh.
have been used for other teams and
Okay.
collegiate sports programs, et cetera.
Okay.
But it is, well, one truth and 2 lies.
Okay.
So our studio Simon Stumper today asks, what was that name? One that was okay then, but not now. And here are your choices. Was
I'm-
it A, the Hickory Apaches, B, the Hickory Crusaders, or C, the Hickory Rebels?
Huh. You think Rebels would not be okay today? I think Rebels, I don't.
Normally, I do not like to give you help because what good are trivia questions if you got to give the person trying to answer information to help them. But in this case, I will say Rebels is a name that, even though, look, you've got Ole Miss, they're the Rebels. Even there are some programs that have kept that name. But I can tell you here, my son Cooper went to Atherton High School here in Louisville, and they're the Rebels. And if they have not already changed that name, and I have to admit, I'm not certain if they have or they haven't, there has been some public discourse about people wanting them to change the name because, anybody who goes against the grain is a rebel. You can be any kind of a rebel. You could be a musician doing different kind of music, and so you're a rebel. But rebels are kind of associated with the Confederacy and the Old South, and not in a positive light. So yes, Rebels has come under scrutiny as a name that is deemed no longer appropriate. Now, by the way, whether that's right or wrong, I'm not weighing in about that. I'm just saying what is being.
I understand. You are not making value judgments. You're listing potential names that have all come under scrutiny in various ways. My high school, we were the Red Raiders, and we used Native American imagery in our logo, and we abandoned that. Radnor High School is now the Radnor Raptors, the bird, not the dinosaur. That notwithstanding, okay, let's get back to this. I'm going to do some sussing here. I'm going to say Crusaders is the one that is not resonating with me because I don't feel like it's specific to that area. Not knowing what what territory it was where the Apache people lived and still live, that one seems like a possibility. And then Rebels being associated with the South feels very specific to me, to the South. I know you were not trying to give me any hints. I didn't take what you said as a hint, but I think I'm going to go with Rebels because I feel like that one is sort of, in my mind anyway, that what I can tie most specifically to that place.
Well, even though I was saying that I try not to give you help, I actually thought my intent was to give you help with this one. First of all, let's say this. Your answer is correct. Congratulations.
Oh, okay, thank you. I still wasn't sure. Right up until that moment, I was not sure.
It was the Hickory Rebels.
Okay.
The reason that I included Apaches was I wanted to include a Native American name. Now, Hickory is in Catawba County, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
The Catawbas were the indigenous people that lived in that region, and thus the name of the county. And so at first I was thinking, well, we can let's give it the indigenous people who were indigenous to that region. But then I was thinking, now let's help Paul a little bit. And I will give a Native American people who were not in that area. So the Apaches were more west in states like Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. So that I thought you would cross that off the list immediately, because you're a very smart person, one of the smartest people I personally know. So I just assumed right away you would know. Nope, they were not in the Carolinas. So
Flattery will get you everywhere.
that's why Apaches. And by the way, the reason I included Crusaders as one of the lies was that's a name that has more recently come under fire because of the connection to the Crusades. But again, like rebels, just because you're a Crusader doesn't mean you crusaded in the Crusades. Look at Batman, the Caped Crusader. So it's one of these things. I completely understand it, but I think sometimes there were words that just aren't offensive that are made offensive by it's guilt by association with something they're not really even associated with. So I understand it.
I think it's an exercise in sort of understanding where people are coming from, and listening with an open mind and an open heart when people tell you they read something that when their perspective is different from ours. So it's always opportunities to learn out there in the world. That's what it's all about. And that's why we do this podcast and learn about America. So Dan, thank you for this thought-provoking question. I'm glad I got it right. And, hopefully starting a new winning streak here.
From your mouth to the stumper's God's ears.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. And thanks also for coming on earlier on this podcast, talking about your work on the Crawdads. We will see you next week.
As always, looking forward to it. See you then.